From Pax Europiana discussing neutrality and why Austrian neutrality, I think, is not a workable solution. Ukraine must be in NATO. And if you look at that, might sound, even Zelensky has said it cannot be. But when you think about it and you discuss it thoroughly, that Ukraine was neutral until 2014 in the so-called Kharkiv Pact of 2010 and in the Budapest Memorandum, how shall be neutrality feasible now under this condition? Of course, you can say you accept neutrality in order to remove the Russian troops, but now Russia is anyhow losing. So shouldn't we really pressure Ukraine to be neutral? I think no, because it's really very hard to justify. And how can Ukraine be secure? Because when you have the Budapest Memorandum, where the world powers have secured sovereignty, Kharkiv Pact, where Russia has secured sovereignty, and both were broken in 2014 and in 2022, how shall then Ukraine ever be secure? Zelensky calls now for a new security alliance. Yeah? That's the effect. If NATO is not working, then he tries to create a new one. Some of the pro-Ukrainian in NATO states create a separate NATO. I mean, that's also very, very negative. Yeah, that would be harmful for NATO. Then we have one NATO here, and then we have a Northern European, Lithuanian, Sweden, UK kind of secondary NATO with Ukraine. I mean, that's complete nonsense. Yeah, and so we should avoid that. Yeah, we must have the courage to invite Ukraine, even against the will of Russia, into NATO. Obviously, it will not be full Ukraine. Yeah, I don't think, and it was also in 2014 the reality that Crimea and Donbass and half of Donbass is with more or less Russia. And that I have said under the context of Western German integration of NATO. We have to accept, not recognize. I remind everybody, Western Germany never recognized Eastern Germany until the last day of Eastern German existence. Then they unified again. So we cannot ask Ukraine to recognize Crimea or give up Donbass. That's impossible. Nobody in Ukraine will do that. And that's not on the agenda. What we can do is integrate Ukraine in NATO and the EU. And as Western Germany was integrated only 10 years after the World War II. And so they can be integrated, it's absolutely true, but only in the non-occupied territories. And where these territories will be, we will find a certain armistice line. And Russia is already consolidating its forces. They wanted to go much further to Moldova and, to the west. Yeah? Now they're only sending cruise missiles to Lviv. Only. It's terrible enough. But there is no way they can conquer the whole of Ukraine. And even the half of Ukraine, I think they have already, their forces west of the Dnieper are already isolated. And if they really will double down and attack fully now when America is fully mobilized and is really very much into this war, and Biden is calling him a war criminal and an atrocious criminal guy, so I think America will fully now come into this. And also Europe, next week at the summit, there will be, everybody talks about unprecedented sanctions already. There will be really unprecedented sanctions coming up. That will be the energy boycott. That will be the trade boycott. It will come. It takes some time. And, now there was, of course, a big shock. And we were now 4 weeks in this war. And it took some time to accommodate and to understand the dimensions. But now the speech of Zelensky at the German Bundestag was a turning point in the German-Ukrainian situation. Absolutely. I mean, he devastated. He tore into Scholz, and Scholz was hiding away because he couldn't defend all his policies of appeasement and of finding an agreement. But in some ways, there's one truth. We have to find an agreement. But the agreement will be, of course, not a lot of territorial gains of Russia. And I think if Russia wants to have territorial gains above, beyond the Crimea and beyond Donbass, like, for example, Mariupol, this corridor, then the result must be a continuation of our sanction regime and of the isolation of Russia. So if Russia goes, says, for example, they want the whole East, they don't have it actually. I was also in the beginning thinking that they will conquer the east of Ukraine, but they have not militarily done it, and they will not do it. They would have to give up all these very precious Mykolaiv, Kherson, and concentrate their forces in the east. But as Putin had the strategy to basically take the whole Black Sea coast and take the whole of the east and take Kiev, these are too many military targets. It's impossible for him to take all these military targets. He doesn't have enough people and enough munition, logistics, and also the backing in the Russian population, in the Russian system, is not big enough for that one. And so he could consolidate, but he doesn't want to consolidate. So he is in a complete double bind. So again, I repeat, if he wants to keep the whole of, more, and the whole is impossible, even half of it, or it's basically 40% east of the Dnieper, it is not possible anymore. And we will then continue the sanctions. I advocate to tighten the sanctions now very strictly in the next summit, also next week already, because we have now Friday, and then the summit will be on Thursday and Friday. So there's the moment when we have to tighten the sanctions and we have to screw very heavily and to make a complete of the Russian economy. And that will be the moment he can then double down and make a lot of atrocities, whatever, will bomb something with some hypersonic or with some nuclear bomb. Yeah, it's even possible that, it's everything. But, he will be alone. Not even China. Even China has now made, there's today this telephone call with Xi. So that's very clear that the Chinese are not part of this venture. As I said, it's in many years, the Chinese are not an aggressive power for conquest. They see themselves as the most important country of the world. Okay, they have also the most population. There's a case for that, and they are a communist country, and there's a lot of things wrong. 20 different issues I have listed in one of my slides. But the thing is, they are not aggressive, conquering imperial power in that sense, and they are not risk takers. They don't want to endanger all the success they had now. 40 years of Western integration or world integration of China since the visit of Deng Xiaoping in the US in 1980 in February. He came there and he has opened China, and they don't want to close China from the world markets. No, they don't want to do that at all. They want to be the world market and not that way. So it's clear for me that they will just maybe do some token solidarity, but they will certainly not do that. So that's the point. I just got an email, so I have to look at it later. So sorry for the interruption mentally. The situation is clear. So what we need to do is actually we are not well advised to take the NATO option for Ukraine off the table. In a peace settlement, where both sides have a demarcation line. And, I'm also not 100% sure where will be the demarcation line. Crimea, I don't think the Russians will give back. That would be Austrian neutrality. I remind everybody, Austrian neutrality was a deal for unity. Austrian neutrality meant the Russians left completely. They gave all the territory of Austria back. So that is, of course, that would be great. That would be fully acceptable for Ukraine to be neutral, but united and to be in the EU, like Austria is in the EU and the Euro. That is what I say all the time. But of course, that will be not on the offer. So there will be one kind of contact line like we have already today in the contact line to Donbass, and there will be some contact line, maybe it will be shifted further into Ukraine. But nevertheless, there will be a contact line. So will this be the same contact line like now we had it from 2015 to 2022, that there was constant shelling and shooting? Or will it be a contact line like the German wall, basically the Mauer? So I think that would have been much better from the beginning, a kind of stabilized frozen conflict where they do their thing over there, and Ukraine accepts that, never recognizes it, the world learns to live with it, and we then continue to have Ukraine, the security in NATO. Because if we just do EU, I was also advocating for that, but I was thinking about it. If we just do EU for Ukraine, then it means that the Americans, which have proven to be the only real friends of Ukraine, are not into the security guarantee for Ukraine. And are we really able as EU to defend Ukraine if Russia comes in 2 years or in 5 years again, under Putin or under some other guy? I don't think so. So we have to make sure that there is a clearly agreed demarcation line, whatever that ultimately will be. I have this, of course, I think if they want to march, then our sanctions must continue. If they make a reasonable, under the circumstances, reasonable demarcation line offer, then of course their offer should be of the West also to de-escalate the sanctions. And integrate Russia again in the world economy to some extent. We have to also discuss about the huge damages they did, because these damages will be put to the European taxpayers, the Americans, so the Western taxpayers, in part of the IMF and the World Bank. And then we are in this complete mess situation. And that's, I think, something we should not really then accept, because Russia has a lot of income and they sell us a lot of things. And then we have to start to take that off these revenues, and confiscate and put them the bill in, and that's the logical thing. And this must be negotiated when they want too much land, and then we have all this kind of bill to impose to them, if they are reasonable and go, for example, let's say in the Crimea and these 2 new independent state lands they have created, Okay, it's of course not okay. It's a crime, and if the Russians withdraw to that, and then Ukraine gets into NATO, and then there can be some security established, Or I would actually argue to go back into the pre-February 23rd alliance, and there is already fortification. And as I said all the time, let's then have Ukraine in NATO, and these 2, Crimea is then with Russia, not officially, never recognized, but we can accept a certain status for the withdrawal. And then that would be something. We will never agree on Crimea and on Donbass being independent. That is illusion. And if Russia wants to do that, then they of course can continue to fight. But the longer they are fighting, the more resolve the West gets, the more resolve Ukraine gets, the more adversity Russia gets, the more isolated Russia gets. So the longer this drags into April, or even longer, Vietnam style and Bosnian style for years and years, it's potentially, I was also thinking it will be that long, but I think it will be very, very terrible costs for Russia, and it will lead to the defeat of Putin. I mean, that's now a real possibility, because the campaign is going so badly. And he has not he is not fully escalated, because he knows that his forces can be destroyed. And now the supplies and the whole system of the West is gradually going on. Of course, the Germans do much too less, and Zelensky made that very clear. I wrote an article in the Ukraine Journal about that. But the thing is that we are, in a way, how can I say it best? I think the more he escalates, the more he isolates, and it will be a complete disaster then. And maybe there's also a cynical calculation in here that his most of his prime attack potential is now destroyed in Ukraine, and the rest has been blooded and is international ostracized. So maybe he has really gone into a kind of Ukraine trap in some ways. You can put it like this. And it's hard for him to extradite. And as I have said also in my podcast, in my audio podcast today, I was talking a lot about the concept of nuclear arms and deterrence. Don't worry, there will be no nuclear escalation with Russia. And if it is there, we have much more nuclear weapons, and they work much better, and they are really very effective, and the logic of the mutually assured destruction is working. That's the Cold War logic, and I was raised in that one in the 80s when I was a military officer. We always believed in it, and it was always true. In all the years, it was the fact that it stabilized even in much more hotter conflicts in the 1960s, in the Czechoslovakian crisis, in the Hungarian crisis, in the Suez crisis, in the Kennedy assassination crisis, in the Cuba crisis, in the Berlin crisis, in the Korea crisis, in the China crisis, so many big crises. And it always worked. The stability of the nuclear deterrent and the mutually assured destruction always works. So, as I said now, since I came 2016 to Ukraine, I said it all the time. NATO is the security guarantee, and there is only the US alternative, but is it strong enough, and can we really defend Ukraine without America? I say no. When you think about it, I was also very much for the Cypriot-style solution, but before the war. Now I think NATO membership is ultimately the only way to settle that, because there can be no other security. Only then Ukraine is under the nuclear umbrella, and then there must be a division line which is acceptable for both sides, and seemingly Russia must to lose more troops, and the bleeding must go on in order for Putin to understand that he cannot win. And he must be more isolated. And that's why my big, how can I say, the problem I already called 2 weeks ago for a complete energy cutoff. We have the reserves, the complete cutoff could have been the sign, and must next week be the sign for Putin to say it's over, because even the Germans and the Austrians and the Hungarians, his Axis allies, and they are basically then leaving him. And this is very important, and we can do some weeks without it. They say in 2 weeks the gas will be over. Let's see for that. I don't think so, because we have a European energy system. And we have other suppliers, obviously, from Trans-Adriatic Pipeline, from Azerbaijan, and the liquid gas. It's not that we are not having any other gas, And we have also gas from Norway. So, of course, there must be maybe some management, some reduction, but that's the wartime logic, that you have rationing. And then we have it a bit colder, but at least the war is stopped, and that's much more cheaper, because Habeck says now it's 3%, or some estimations, 3% loss for the German economy. In Corona we had 7 or 8%. So let's 3% less, okay? That's of course not 100,000. They talk about hundreds and thousands of unemployed. Then let's make a rescue package as we had in Corona. That's anyhow necessary. Let's make a second debt package. All these things the EU is not doing, and I cannot understand it. It is absolutely confusing for me what the EU is not doing here. And they say they are doing so much. They have done no second package. They have done this umbrella recovery fund. They could do it. They have not settled with Poland the issues which are now fighting for a year. That must all be done in order to really help the countries. They have not integrated Romania in the Eurozone, not allowed the Euro adoption for Moldova, etc., etc. And they have not speeded up enlargement, so it's really quite dramatic, and it's really very bad. So better Europe must come next week, and that's what I hope for, a Europe which is able to give a major contribution to the crisis. But without America, we are lost. That's my strong belief, and I repeat it, and it's visible now, I think, to everybody, that without America, Ukraine would be lost, and America is with us, and America means NATO, and NATO is the defense alliance of Europe. The Ukrainians are Europeans, so they must join NATO. It's very logical, and that's, I think, the no to the neutrality talks, because they will be just, talks for the consumption, that everybody is seen nicely to talk. But neutrality means that Ukraine is again alone. And how shall that work? Because Putin can come back any time again. Neutrality, if it means unity again, that's absolutely good. But unfortunately, I don't think Putin is ready for that. So that's my perception on all these issues. I wish for peace, and I wish for fast and peace, for the end of hostilities, but we have to put it on a framework that works, and the troops have to leave, and this is kind of a badly managed peace might lead to much more atrocities, and much more injustice, because you see what Russia is doing in the occupied territories. They are torturing the people and putting them on the march in order to drive them away. So they do ethnic cleansing like they did in Syria and in other wars, and that's the mentality of Russia. And everybody who's not happy must go or will be shot, and then they take the property of these people. This is the military logic of the medieval ages. And that's, I think, the development of Russia. Anyhow, good. More to come from Pax Europiana for peace. Bye.